Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about learning your favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-hosts with me today, Matt Rossa. How you doing today, Matt?
I really need to come up with a Rock of Eternity related pun there.
You should.
I don't know how many people would get it, but if you guys don't know about Shazam / Captain Marvel, and he was the first Captain Marvel, it's just a fact. You should totally look into it sometime because they had some whack out stuff in the original Captain Marvel comics. Like the talking tiger who wore pants was like the least weird thing they had.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say. Comics during that time period, which would again, we can talk about that someday if people are interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were wild.
And never the same kind of wild. Like the Spectre versus, Captain Marvel versus Batman versus the Justice Society. Completely different flavors of odd.
Yeah, they were.
And there's characters like you mentioned, like the Phantom Lady. But go ahead, man.
I was gonna say, but that's not what we're here to talk about, or the fact that Jimmy Olsen once dated a supervillain who was really a banshee. But that's another whole weird story element that we could get into. We're here to answer questions today from you, our wonderful listeners, and we're gonna go ahead and we'll get started with those in a second. But if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, I want to encourage you to send them in. Please be sure to send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, and then give us any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us up on Discord. We have 2 server channels set aside for you. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel. It's open for everybody. You can go ahead and the same rules apply there. Just throw us your questions. We also have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. And then you can also send us messages directly on Patreon. And it's not just limited to questions. You can also send us anything you have for themes that you want us to cover for the potentially for a lore watch in the future. And I encourage you to send those in, especially now that we know that we're getting closer to a midnight, deeper reveal. Or if you have any questions about any of the books or the times in between, or any speculation you want us to go off on a wild tangent on there inside, we're happy to do so. But we just need to know which ones you want us to go with. Or if you want us to talk about comic books for, an hour, twist my arm. It'll be tough.
Joe doesn't want it. Don't make him do it, guys. Don't make him do it. Don't throw him in the briar patch.
But our first question today is going to wind up coming from our good friend Verdigree. This is a second part of the questions that was asked last week that spawned an entire episode. So thank you, Verdigree. Did they ever know warlocks were using Titan magic? Did they care to ask the druids about the overlap with arcane magic? This is about the Kirin Tor, by the way. All this to say, I now really dig the trajectory of the Kirin Tor story, taking Xal'atath's reality check to heart, leaving behind literal ivory towers and echo chambers, and gracefully retiring from Leroy Jenkinsing a city into conflict, and pivoting to a decentralization, non-hierarchical research and education role, perhaps. Like the Jedi need the Sith to define themselves, the real unlimited power was the frenemies we made along the way. Yours truly, Archmage Verdigree. The reason I wanted to bring this up again was the level of isolation of magic, I guess, would be an interesting topic for the Kirin Tor, because that does seem like an interesting perspective, because we know that the Kirin Tor have access to, or had access to, a vast library of knowledge as far as humans are concerned. It wasn't quite the Azure archives, although those are now open, at least somewhat open when they're not trying to actively kill you. But the idea of, did they understand that warlocks were using Titan magic, or did they actually talk to druids about the fact that druids do have an overlap with arcane magic? Did they ever, actively research that, talk with those groups? I don't know that we've ever had an indication that they did. Do we, Matt?
We've had minor indications that primarily anything like that they would have had would have been done through one of the Guardians, because the Guardian, even before they had their own sanctum in I want to say Karazhan. That's not it. No, it is Karazhan.
Yeah, the Karazhan, the basically the Guardian Tower.
Brain was really not working. Before Medivh, quote unquote, built Karazhan, and we could go into that in a second, but there were still multiple Guardians before his mother, before Egwene, and they were the ones who went to places other people on the Eastern Kingdoms would never have thought to go. Egwene went to the to Northrend and fought the Arbiter Sargeras up there. She did that way, close to 100 years before the first and second war.
And then, dragged its body
So a
back
lot,
and shoved it into a Titan
yeah.
facility in the middle
In
of the lost
another,
Broken Isles,
yeah, Titan facility in the Broken Isles. She just rocks up and sticks him in there. So it's clear that there was information available to the Kirin Tor and the Guardians that they weren't sharing. But in terms of like, did they talk? Did they know that the Warlocks were using Titan magic? I doubt it, because they didn't study Warlock magic very much. They mostly either locked it away or tried to destroy it. In fact, the whole reason that Dalaran gets raided in the second Warcraft game is because they're trying to get the book, a cipher from the Kirin Tor that will allow them to replicate Nirzul's experiments. They want to open up portals. Nirzul wants to open up portals all over the place, and for that he needs the magic that the Kirin Tor had their hands on. So that magic is probably the closest we're going to get to something Titanic that would be related to this, but it's we don't have a lot of information about this kind of stuff specifically. There's no stories of like Kirin Tor mages heading over to Kalimdor and chatting with druids, because at the time I don't think you could find druids other than like in Gilneas with the old folk, and they were like hedge druids at this point. They were so far away from the original source of druidic magic that they didn't really have the true mojo. They would just like, they could cast a couple of spells and do some old prayers.
Well, also think about it during the time frame. Like, if you would assume that they were going to talk with any druids, the prime time that they would have done that, most of them were asleep. Most of them were engaged in that hibernation cycle with our cosplay and Malfurion.
Yeah, I mean, they were doing that, and also they were a continent away through an ocean that nobody wanted to sail through at the time. Like, keep in mind that the chances of sailing directly into the maelstrom were pretty bad back then.
Yeah, and teleporting to an unknown location is not something that mages would do. And at this point, Dalaran was not exactly a floating city that they could just like sail across the world.
It was still a regular city just in the ground.
And
Kalimdor, cities are supposed to be, guys.
Yeah, and Kalimdor was often viewed, or at least thought of, as a wild, untamed, dangerous place, right? Like,
or a fantasy. Like, there's an actual story of there's a story of a blood elf who found records of Kalimdor in Silvermoon, and was like, "Is this some like high elf fantasy? Like, what is this?" And keep in mind, he was only like 2 generations removed from elves that had actually left Kalimdor to become the High Elves.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, like, a lot of it is just deliberate. We don't want to talk about this. We don't want to talk about that place because they kicked us out.
Yeah.
So, and keep in mind, it was the High Elves who trained the original mages that eventually became the Kirin Tor. That's just why there were High Elves in the Kirin Tor. It would not be surprising to me to find out that the High Elves were like kind of steering people away from talking to druids and going to Kalimdor, because druids are the ones who banished them.
Yeah, and think about it this way too. Like, the only other group on the Eastern Kingdoms that would have been able to maybe talk about that, we're looking at maybe the trolls, right? Like, they would be the other ones that would have any potential knowledge of druidism. Because there is a cross reference there. Because I mean, we can talk about troll magic here in a second as well. But also, the humans and trolls don't get along. They had whole wars about it. The Kirin Tor wasn't exactly going to go out of their way to go talk with them and say, "Hey, what's up, my troll friends? Give me a high 3. Let's talk about what happens with your magic."
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem there is that the Kirin Tor wouldn't exist if the High Elves hadn't been desperate enough to go to the humans and say, "We need your help against the trolls."
Mm-hmm.
And that wouldn't have happened if the trolls weren't homicidal maniacs. And now, did the trolls have reason to be homicidal maniacs? Yes, of course they did. I mean, that would be ridiculous to say, did they have reason? Of course they did. These multiple different invader groups came to a land that they'd had since before the initial, sundering, and suddenly they're there. You know, if you're a troll, you're like, why are there elves living in my woods? Why are there humans living in my plains? These were ours. Why are you here? Get out. And both the elves and humans' response was along the lines of no. To the humans, they're like, we've been here. No one's been here but us. You just came down one day and decided. It was like, no, this was ancestrally ours. And so, fighting. Because both trolls and humans at that time were incredibly aggressive.
I mean, let's also
So,
remember that humans had a leader whose, last name is literally Trollbane.
Yeah, yeah. There's a sword called Troll Kalar, which like literally means troll killer. Yeah, they were not kidding around about this. And also, at the same time, like I said, the High Elves just showed up and just took over the best part of what what we call Quel'Danas, because that's what the elves called it. That was all part of the Mani tribe's dominion, that whole area. Going from the very tip where the Sunwell and Silvermoon are, all the way down into like Gilneas and what do you call it, Hillshire. Those were all troll places. And then further down, I mean, you can go to the Highlands. You see troll stuff all over the place. The Arathi Highlands, covered in troll stuff. So, I mean, there's still trolls living there trying to get the humans out thousands of years later. So yeah, there's a lot of back and forth on that. There's the reason that the Kirin Tor wouldn't be particularly welcome. And then there's the problem that the Kirin Tor had kind of a separation issue.
Mm-hmm.
When the kingdoms, like the Arathi Empire, became the Seven Kingdoms, they didn't take the city up into the sky at that moment, but they did start isolating themselves. They did pull away. Like they didn't want to be talked. They didn't want to get involved in the mundane affairs of other nations, even if those mundane affairs were, trolls are attacking us, or, we're kind of having a problem with like the land in revolt, or what have you. The Kirin Tor like get back to us when it's demons, or get back to us when it's mages. So there's their focus against demonic magic of any kind to keep them from studying it to figure out, oh wait, this is like similar to these Titan magics they have. The fact that they didn't have a lot of Titan magics, and the stuff they had was often in books written by people who were reading books from other people. Like the one that always comes to mind for me is the bit where they talk about how Elune might have been involved in the ordering of the cosmos, and the reason, Khadgar read this and thought, oh, wow, maybe Elune's, a tear of Elune can wake up one of the Naru Primes. I mean, not Naru Primes. No, it is Naru.
Yeah,
Naru
Naru.
Primes. And so they used it to wake up Zira. But it's like, dude, this was a book written based on other books that we don't even have anymore. That's like a lot of Kirin Tor knowledge ended up being like that. It's like second or third hand. It's compilations. Yeah. Remember when we went to the Broken Isles, how jazzed the mages were to finally get a chance to look at the first editions of stuff.
Yeah, like stuff that had been talked about for generations of.
Oh, yeah, I get a book that mentions a book that mentions this.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing to keep in mind too with the Kirin Tor at the time is a lot of their, especially over the years, and we talked about this in the last episode, and there's more questions. Trust me, we're not going to spend the entire time on Kirin Tor, although we could. They were very, as Matt said, focused on very different aspects, and not necessarily just different magics, but let's say in terms of druidism, they may have books on druids, but it may not be what you think it is. And maybe this is what we've heard that druids can do and how you fight against it. Or warlocks of summoning demons and lashing them to, their will. They probably had books on it, but it wasn't necessarily studying it. It was more likely how to fight it or combat it or to work against it
or something.
And absolutely any knowledge they would have had about, trolls. Because again, trolls weren't just like shaman and druids. Trolls, like they had not quite warlock, but Shadowhunter is a magic in and of itself, right? Like it is a primal magic that has a source that we have not really dove into. We dove a little bit into it in the Vol'jin book, but not really. Like we know that it links with the Loa in a way that druidism doesn't. We know that it links with Azeroth in a way that the other magics don't. And it's,
what it reminds me of?
What's that?
The Drust.
It really does. Yeah.
The way Drusts approach druidism is very similar to me to Shadowhunters. So I definitely think there's room for that to be connected up.
And the interesting thing is, like, had they had stopped and realized that the world was growing smaller and that you can't just worry about fighting all of your neighbors, this is all categories that they would have had been prime. Like, they could have written volumes and volumes and volumes of books on this stuff, especially because at the time when we meet them in originally the world, like when World of Warcraft and the Kirin Tor are around, they're talking about trying to become more neutral. They're not doing it, not for a while, and honestly, that leads to some problems later on in the story where you have, the whole mana bomb situation.
Yeah, we
Um,
don't even see we don't even see Kultiris as an actual
Not Kultiris, Kirin Tor.
place. Kirin Tor, yeah, but Kirin Tor and Kultiris are kind of tied together.
A
Not
little bit,
Kultiris,
yeah.
sorry, Dalaran. We don't even see Dalaran until Wrath.
Yeah.
And before that, there are certainly members of the Kirin Tor showing up, but they're like occasional, like Archmage Anselm,
Or the ones
who's
that
mostly just there because he wants his daughter not to get killed by
or the
pirates.
members of the members that are also members of the Violet Eye that sit outside of Karazhan.
Yeah, yeah. At the basically the opening of Burning Crusade, the middle of the beginning of Burning Crusade.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that they don't have any presence, but they don't have a unified. We have we're here because the entire Kirin Tor backs us. The entire Kirin Tor is mostly busy. Turns out floating their city away. But yeah, it is weird. Joe's right that it is not an organization that at first has any real cohesion to it.
Yeah, and I think it's not even that it lacks the cohesion. Like, that's definitely a factor in it, but it's also the sheer desire, or the sheer, like, when they come together, their focus isn't necessarily research. Like, the times of Antonidas are gone, right? Like, he's not there anymore. He's not present. His pupil is in the wind. The next best archmage. You have Jaina Promore, right? She's just not there. You have Khadgar missing at the opening of everything, until we don't get to see Khadgar until we go to BC, right? Like, that's the first time we interact with Khadgar at all. The world is in a weird place when magic is concerned. The Kirin Tor are not exactly in a positive place, and like Matt said, we don't get really interact with most of them until Wrath. And at Wrath, they're trying to take this neutral role, but it's still a war footing. It's not. It's still a we need to fight, not research. And I always found that fascinating, because that at that moment Wrath is the perfect time they could have started having these conversations too, right? They could have pulled other heroes aside. How does your magic work? Let's talk about this. Let's see if there's overlap. Let's see if there's a way we can combine our powers and strengths. Instead, they're launching fireballs. And then after that, we still have more of the same, and more of the same, and more of the same, even when they throw out the blood elves. I think it was the Sun Reavers from Dalaran in particular. Like, when they throw them out of Dalaran, they're still on a war footing. And it isn't until now, literal decades later, where Dalaran has to be blown up, and Khadgar and the rest, even Khadgar falls to prey to this as well, is forced to take stock of their direction. Do we even get something resembling like an actual evaluation of where they go? And now maybe we can actually start having those conversations. And I think that might potentially be very important moving into the next two expansions, because like you've pointed out here, Verd, warlocks use Titan magic to bind demons to their will. That seems like something the Kirin Tor may actually be interested in, especially in the coming, two expansions, right? We got to be dealing with Xal'atath, who's bending things to her will. That's a central theme moving into Midnight. And we're going to be dealing with Titan stuff. Well, dissecting Titan magic seems like an important thing if we're going to be dealing with Titan stuff. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be this is how we fight it, but it does have to be this is how we understand it. Here's how we understand their connection to these planes, or these locus of power, or how they weave their spells that will become important. And now you have the scattered group of Kirin Tor, this organization, actually caring about, well, learning again, going back to their roots, what they were originally founded for. And instead of maintaining their city, and instead of, going off to war at the drop of a hat, or, focusing all their energy on maintaining a floating city that they're bringing to war, they can go do research now. They can go find lost tomes. They now have the knowledge that multiple worlds exist. They have access to archives that were never open to the mortal realms before. Like the Azure Archive, I don't think it can be understated how important that is going to be for mages. It's super important for the Blue Dragon flight, but imagine a mage being invited in by Kael'thas to say, look for not just the first edition, but look for proto editions, things that existed in research notes and thoughts and, thesis statements before it was actually written into a text or a manual. How invaluable would that be? We've already seen like glimpses of that, right? So, and they can do the same thing with the druids. Things are calmed down enough. We now have Belamath, which I think is really cool because it is a new elven city where all elves are welcome. And not only does it let them talk to druids, it lets them talk to arcane elves. It lets them talk to elves that practice other forms of music, like that very singular night elf paladin. Can we please get more night elf paladins? Can we make that a thing, Blizzard, please? I would really appreciate it. They have the access to potentially the why can't I even talk now? The folks, the Blood Elves may actually have presence there occasionally, especially with what happens in the next expansion, where we know
it would make sense. I mean, that's the other thing too. One of the things that would make sense for the Kirin Tor moving forward, and I hate to do this to people because the World of Warcraft comic had a very divisive effect on some folks. I'm not saying bring Medan back or anything like that, but there was one idea they had for the Council of Tirisfal that I think could be used in terms of, with the Kirin Tor and other groups, is to actually recreate a Council of Tirisfal that has representatives from each of these big magical conclaves.
Oh my god, that would be so amazing! An actual conclave of the magic users of Azeroth.
Yeah, like you'd have the Kirin Tor representing mages. They could reach out to other groups of just mages that are out in the world that are not part of the Kirin Tor right now. Like for instance, the ones that have joined the Night Elves. Night Elves have mages again. They should be talking with those guys because their magic. They had demon summoning magic.
And they need to be talking with the Blood Elves. I've been saying this for years. Spellbreakers are one of the most important things that we have never gotten to play in the game, but are specific. And we talked about it last week. They're specifically designed to interact with magic in a way that other magic users aren't.
Yeah, they're kind of like. It's funny. I said before that I thought they'd make a good paladin spec. They'd also would work as warriors too because of spell reflection and stuff. But in terms of their lore, they are a completely distinct martial order.
Yeah.
They're a martial order that basically exists. We want to keep having magic, but we don't want any of the negative stuff. So we're going to make this group so that if anybody gets out of line, we will come down hard on them. And that's a kind of magic that I'm sure there are people out there who would love to learn it, who are not blood elves.
Imagine humans breaking out into like spellbreaker patterns in order to fight a rogue wizard or a rogue arcane force across the universe, or even more like devourers. That'd be
whatever those things are. Yeah. I don't know what that thing is, but I know one thing: I don't want it to eat any magic right now, so I'm going to just shut that off. That's a possibility. I honestly think that one of the great things would be to see like. If you had this council, you'd basically have like the shaman group that we got in Legion and the Cenarian Circle, and they'd all send somebody to it, and it would transcend faction lines entirely. Like it doesn't matter if you're Horde or Alliance. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about these weird things that are coming up out of the ground, and not necessarily we're gonna like muster up and go fight them. That's down there. We are going to comprehend them. We are going to be the ones who give you quests to bring you. Could you bring me 10 Devourer eyes? I really need to look at their eyes. For what? I need to see what they can see.
Well, and,
Like, do they see life force? Do they see anima? I need you to do that.
and I
And
think
while you're at it, my druid friend over here, he wants their tongues.
yeah,
Why?
I think that becomes more important too, especially because like, and I think this can't be overstated as well. Go through Ecodome Eldani if you have the chance in the current expansion, and pay attention to the variation of devourers that are there. They mutate and evolve based off of what they consume. This becomes exceptionally important, and research into them very important. I'd love to see that being taken seriously.
I agree.
Hopefully that answers your question. Again, we could probably talk about this for a good long while, but since we just had the full Kirin Tor episode, we're going to move on to some other questions. This one comes from Arohan. Thinking about the War Within trailer, the story seems to have very quickly left behind the premise and characters seen in the trailer. Anduin and Thrall are being called by Azeroth, but after teleporting Dalaran up above Khazalgar, we don't really get more story of the World Soul beyond Magni being released from being the speaker. So did Azeroth actually call anyone? Anduin and Thrall have never really been in tune with the World Soul before, and both have been lost. Anduin has been wandering since Shadowlands, and Thrall has been trying to find himself since Warlords of Draenor. Was Azeroth actually Xal'atath in disguise, preying on former leaders that were seeking guidance and purpose? We already know she absolutely wanted Dalaran brought to Khazalgar, and we wouldn't have done so without Azeroth calling us here, or calling us there. That's an interesting speculation. So I think there's two parts to the question here. First, I will definitely agree. While we do have some story elements that remained with Anduin throughout the campaign of the War Within, we hit the section with essentially the Arathi returning to mainland from underground and getting to see some of the ancestral homes, and Anduin basically just saying, I got to go deal with something. I'll catch up with you later. And then sort of disappearing. Thrall not really being present. And I mean, and maybe somebody who plays Horde will tell me otherwise, because I've been playing mainly my Alliance tune this expansion. But by and large, Thrall's not really around. You don't really interact with him very much. I mean, we have the moment where they come to Khazalgar on the boats and everybody's there, but really we don't have a whole lot of interaction there. And most of the interaction with NPCs we have afterwards are Illyria, for obvious reasons, throughout the hunt for Xal'atath and into the current content release. Khadgar,
Yeah, the only real storyline I can think of for Thrall is the one where he helps you go up and get the new griffins for the Storm Riders.
Yeah, like
That's
he helps.
basically it.
He helps you do shaman things if you're even if you're not a shaman, and then kind of like disappears into the sunset. Really.
Yeah, like, well, you guys don't have a shaman, so you need me. But no, I am a shaman. Yes, but you're right. You need me. Okay, whatever. You can be here too, I guess. That's cool. Yeah.
But it goes with something that I'm not gonna use this as a platform for my complaints, but it is something that was really off-putting to me with the way the story developed, because I figured there's a lot of stuff here that seems like it wouldn't be a long-term payoff. Like the Anduin stuff is fine. The Anduin stuff, that arc makes sense. Him disappearing after getting to where getting back to the mainland is a little like my people need me and disappears into space Poochie style. But otherwise, up to that point, I think it makes sense. Thrall and the other leaders like really don't make a lot of sense at that point, because they kind of do like one thing and then disappear or stop being relevant. Like they just like it's like that old scene in like I forgot what comic book it is, but it's like when the page is closed, we're not activated, we're not turned on, so we just kind of sit here and do nothing. And it kind of is a little bit of what it feels like. Even Moira, to an extent, Moira has the story element that goes up through Magni, and then her son is present. Her son is doing stuff and collecting Titan discs and unraveling the sort of fate and truth behind the earthen background. But even that stops at a certain point, because you do all the discs, you get everything you need, and there's no more chapters available for it. And then Moira just kind of is hanging out with Magni. Like, we're going to go be father and daughter now. I don't care what's happening with the rest of the world. I did my job. I'm gone. So like that feels a little weird. I don't know. Like how do you feel about it in general?
It reminds me of original World of Warcraft.
Really? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, like you'd go do a bunch of stuff, interact with certain NPCs, get to a certain point. You'd go into Blackrock Depths as an example for Magni, or for Thrall. You're always just like, I don't want this. I don't want any more trouble with the dwarves. Go handle this. Okay. Sure thing, Thrall. Why is Thrall sitting? I don't know. Then you'd get to that point where you kill her boyfriend and find out that he was her boyfriend, and you're like, "Oops, I'm just gonna leave." Yeah, let's just go. And then you don't see Moira again for a while. Even though the next dungeon you do is Molten Core, you'd think there'd be more with the Dark Iron Dwarves and stuff, but other than jumping through a window, because of the way that they did the attunement process, I had to do it the original way, where you actually had to walk through all of Blackrock Depths to get to the portal to the Molten Core. But then they made it so you could just jump out of a window and boom, you'd be in there. Then you didn't see any more of it. And then at the end of Molten Core, after you dealt with Ragnaros and you were working with the Hydraxian Waterlords, and you then next raid's a bunch of dragons, and you don't talk to any of these people again, even though, like, wait a minute, why did you want to fight Ragnaros so bad? What's going on with that? No time. We're off to this new thing. And you go through that whole thing with like Deathwing's son and his sister, who's got her own place you go to raid, but she's tied into this. And then you just, okay, now bugs. What bugs? What happened to all? Nope. You Sarfang and you and the bugs. And you're like, okay, well, sure, we'll beat the bug armies, I guess. And did you go to Zul'Gurub yet? Okay, I guess Colt. No, there's oh bloody heck, I can't remember the name of them. Zandalari. Zandalari trolls will be friends with you, and this is not going to affect later on when you have to actually fight them in a raid. It's not going to matter. And then later on, when they join the Horde, it's still not going to matter. But so what I'm saying is, if anything, I feel like it's reclaimed the weird anarchic feeling of original WoW, where there was, instead of having one big bad that affected everything and you were constantly dealing with them, it's like Xal'atath is a presence throughout this expansion, but she's like the only through line, if that makes sense. The only time, the way we get to practically everything we do, from from like Khazalgar and going down into the various other places, that's all about going after Xal'atath when she's riling the Nerubians up. Then when we go to Undermine, it's because Xal'atath is trying to get the heart repaired, that we helped Illyria mess up. When that gets stolen by the Ethereals, we're like, wait a minute, what was that? And then we end up going after it. And then we're now, I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't done it yet. Stuff happens.
Stuff happens in the game. The goalpost shifts again.
Yeah. And at the end of that, none of these people stay with us from thing to thing. And in a weird sort of way, like, I think Anduin having as much presence as he did after the first part of the campaign, the fact that he was very clearly the contact point for the Arathi, and then just as quickly runs off to wherever, that is so peak vanilla World of Warcraft. That is exactly how that used to go. Like, you'd be like, okay, I got you all that giant worm meat, Tyrion. Are you going to help? Yes. Yeah, I'll help you in a vague and unsupportive way, and then I won't be there for the raids. And it's, I don't hate it, but I don't like it either. I kind of feel like I don't like to speculate about what's going on behind the scenes because nobody tells me anything. I do not.
But
know.
A lot of it does feel like some of the story decisions and where these NPCs are going. Yeah. It does feel like it's tied up with what's happening behind the scenes.
I feel like it almost feels to me like the first everything up to Undermine feels like it was intended to be the War Within.
Yes.
And then I feel like the War Within was just supposed to stop at that point, but they didn't. The thing that becomes the opening of Midnight isn't the opening of Midnight. We should have gone. It felt to me like there should have been something involving the Haranir and the Black Blood and all that stuff underground.
Yeah, I was screaming about this on the podcast.
And then after that, we should have gone. Like, the opening would have been going to Koresh, and we would have done probably a bit more in Koresh than we end up doing.
Also,
Like,
my sentiment as well.
And not that we don't do a lot in Koresh. It's a big patch. There's a lot here. But story-wise, it's get there, get to Dementius, get Dementius down. Thing happens. And then we go into Midnight. It feels more like that should have been the start of Midnight. And then from there, we would have done that, get to Dementius, thing happens, proceed along what we've seen from the previews and so forth. And then, whatever that's going to be, profit. And I don't know if they had to take something out, because clearly the Haranir are going to be in Midnight. And I feel like the Haranir were intended to be the way into Midnight.
Well, I'm gonna
pause
that for now because that ties in, I think, with our last question that we're gonna get to.
Okay.
I want to finish answering this question before we get into that because I have some very strong feelings well.
That's what I'm saying. That is my feeling for how this feels versus how I would have expected it to feel. I think it feels a little disjointed for the similar kind of reason, where I think a lot of times in early WoW storytelling, they very deliberately did not follow up on stuff right away so they could follow up on it later if they later on chose to.
Yeah, and there's always been an element of that. There's always been an element of that. We know that there's going to be loose threads, and that's fine, right? Like we sort of expect that. In this case, it seems abrupt.
In this case, I think it does just because for a couple of different reasons, but one of those reasons is it is a real departure from what we have been seeing since Battle for Azeroth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like the storytelling, maybe even take a shift.
Maybe even since Legion.
Because Legion had a
Legion does have a swerve at the end, but it's a swerve we all expected.
And not only that, but it was a cohesive story with shared bylines and through lines.
And the same people keep showing up. Velen doesn't F off to Crystal's land. He shows up for the last bit, even though it's on a different planet because it's his planet. He wants to go back.
Heck, Bill and Ted are a through line throughout the entirety of Legion as well.
That's fair.
Like a minor NPC is present for all of it. But the other side of your question, I want to just kind of get to that before we start going into the other one, because I think the other one's going to cause us to go a little haywire. Did Azeroth actually call anyone? Yeah, we know she did.
Not only do I think she did, I think that is the one thing about the end of the War Within that gives you an idea of why. Because there's a point where you're going to Koresh and the Ethereals and the broker, right? Yeah, Brokers. They're there. And they're like, yes, this is like back when our planet, as Dementius arrived, our planet began singing. And you're like, oh. And there's people on Koresh who were literally like war priests of the world soul.
That had an entire ritual that allowed them to commune and talk with Koresh.
Without turning into diamonds.
But
then again, that might have just been.
But to be fair,
the
dagger that they used, the ritual dagger for it was a crystal. That's the thing
maybe they didn't need to turn into crystal because they had a bunch on them. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely does talk about that. It definitely ties in.
But we also now it ties in with that too, because I think part of it is now instead of Magni being the only speaker, every earthen that is born is now a complete being and is, in all honesty, probably the first true Azeroth-born race in a while. Because every other race that we have on Azeroth, the Titans tinkered with at some point. Almost every single one of them. They were either crafted by the Titans and the Titan Watchers, and we evolved therein, or they were reshaped, or they were messed with by minions of the old Titan Watchers and Titans. We have a whole history of it. These earthen, while they are constructs before they're fully born, now given that light from Azeroth, have that connection. There's a whole thing about it. It's like, no, I dream now. Like I have dreams. I have a connection with something bigger. What is this thing that keeps
happening? Where why does this keep happening? I'm functioning fine. Then suddenly I and I have weird fantasies about things that aren't true.
And they all hear the song, right? They all hear that's one of the shared things of it is they all hear the song of Azeroth. And that means that essentially we have an entire new group of speakers. And we haven't had that defined yet to say how large that is or what that actually means for the longevity of the Earthen. That's a whole subplot with Dagran and I can't remember her name, but the Forge Speaker. Where
Oh
like
yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah,
that's a whole subplot that they're exploring
I
with
like
the
to call her
discs.
Dagran's girlfriend
I mean, because they
because
are.
yeah, even though she's like what several thousand years old and he's like 15, it's like
That
you thought Twilight was bad.
ain't nothing to a dwarf. Don't worry about it.
Also, she does glitter
She does glitter.
in sunlight.
But the idea is that I do think that Azeroth was actually making the call. Now, Xal'atath, I think in this particular case, may have heard it because Xal'atath was present at Koresh. We
When
know
Koresh,
that.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
we know that Xal'atath's magic is involved in the storyline of Koresh. And I'm trying really hard not to spoil anything for folks that haven't finished yet. But she's tied up
Just
with
imagine a box. There's like a box with red lines through it, and it's like
everything comes
Joe.
back to Xal'atath.
Yeah, Joe will tell you later.
Yeah. Um, but she's tied up with the broker. She's tied up with the ethereal. She's tied up with the various cartels, and we know her magic is present there. That's opening sequence of this particular content patch. There's nothing that says that she couldn't have heard Azeroth's call. There's nothing that says she couldn't have been privy to that. She is very powerful, and she is always listening, and she is always the opportunist. And this is just how she is. So Dalaran presents an interesting opportunity. And this ties in with what we talked about beforehand. Dalaran is a huge power source, has a huge number of mages and arcane treasures. It is a magical city. It is perfect for what she's trying to do. But you need to get them off their footing. You need to have them lower their guard. Well, what better way than to play into and take the opportunity to play into their war footing? Because absolutely, if Drendon shows up and says, I agree, we need to go and take the city and sally forth for the defense of Azeroth, this long dead archmage that nobody's really checked in with, of course they're going to listen, and that's an opportunity for her to take it where it needs to go and her to start doing what she needs to do. Because where Dalaran is, they're secured. But in that moment of transferring, in that moment of traveling, in that moment of coming forth, two things happen. One, she gets an opportunity to tear down the wards. Two, the city gets to be sieged by minions that she has already riled up. And in that chaos, she gets to absorb all of that power. Dalaran blowing up, that's just a bonus. She just wanted to suck up the power. But I don't think Xal'atath was the one that was pulling the strings on the song itself. Despite the fact that Anduin and Thrall were lost in hearing the song, I do think that their characters are smart enough at this point, or at least in Anduin's position, questioning enough after what happened in Shadowlands to literally question everything. And
I think too people often forget that Thrall kind of has a connection to the Earth element of Azeroth.
yeah, he was, don't forget, was the replacement for Neltharion in the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole book about it. So I don't think that Xal'atath was the orchestrator of the song. I do think, however, she heard it and took advantage of it. That's my theory. Do you have any thoughts on that particular part of it, Matt?
I think it's interesting that we know, again, trying not to spoil anything for Koresh, but there's a reason that Koresh began singing before its end. And I think Xal'atath is a lot less, like, she presents an incredibly polished and competent front, but I'm starting to think there's some scrambling going on based on what she reveals on Koresh about her relationship to what happened to the ethereals and brokers. And I think when she heard that, her reaction was not, yay, I'm going to profit from this. It was, I got to do something right now. I need to do something right now. I cannot let this happen. And so, whilst I certainly think that she is an antagonist and not to be trusted, I think that what she's doing, it's sort of like Sylvanas back in the old days, where she'd be doing things that you hate, but sometimes she was doing them for reasons you kind of agreed with. And you'd be like, wait, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, we do. I definitely get that feeling, that vibe off Xal'atath here. I definitely don't think she's behind this. I think she is reacting to it. And I think she's reacting to it as someone who knows more about it than we do.
Yeah. Yeah, she definitely knows more about it than we do. I think that's sort of her MO. uh, Hopefully that answered your question though, but I think we're going to try to move on and see if we can get this last one in here because I think this is relevant to part of the conversation where we started floating a little bit earlier. And this one comes from Storm Wintage. Are we finally getting the Elven expansion you've always talked about? Think about it. We have Blood Elves, Harenir, basically Proto Elves, Amani Trolls, basically Proto Elves, and then Sylvanas being hinted at in interviews. Unfortunately, Naga seem to be off the table. What do you guys think? So, for context, during one of the interviews at Gamescom, I forgot which of the folks, but I know Ian Hazakassis was on stage, and I can't remember who he was with, and I really apologize. They were talking about the next expansion. They were talking about Midnight, and literally unprompted, one of the things was Sylvanas being in some of the material is possibly not a mistake. That it may not be the last we've seen of her, which we kind of expected, especially with Ilaria being tied up so keenly in this. I think Matt and I have also speculated that it would not be out of the ordinary for us to see Sylvanas come back to help Ilaria in the final moments of Xal'atath or hunting Xal'atath, because even Venari has a voice line in your questing, and this is a mild spoiler, but it's really early in the questing and the new content. So it's 5-10 minutes in, it's one of the first interactions you have, which is Venari literally turns to Xal'atath and says, "I've been to the Maw. I know what the Void fears. Don't test me." And we know from the comics, and Matt has pointed this out, and we've talked about it in the past, when the Three Sisters comic happened, and all of the sisters were together, the Void was screaming in Illyria's head to destroy Sylvanas. It was terrified of her.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about this for a while. I would put money on Sylvanas showing up at the last second to save Illyria. Because if anybody is going to put Xal'atath on a back footing, it's going to be Sylvanas. It's somebody who's outside of the cycle. The Void is, again, part of the cycle. Matt's talked about this at length. We've talked about this time and time again. Sylvanas doesn't care about the Void. Sylvanas doesn't care about the light. She doesn't care about the natural order of things. She exists outside of it, and that makes her dangerous to the Void. And I think that would be really poetic to have her come back in a triumphant moment to help her sister by really messing up Xal'atath's day. Now, as far as it being a full elf expansion, I don't know that it's going to be that. I think there's going to be elements of it because we know now from the stuff that we saw at Gamescom and the original trailer or the cinematic that we got for it and some of the content that we're going to be dealing with elves. We know that we're going to be in Silvermoon City. We know that we're going to be helping them, and there's going to be interaction there. And we do know that there is assistance coming from multiple locations to defend the Sunwell. We know all of this. This is all not spoilers. This is all stuff that they have in promotional materials. It is possible that some of those would be more elves. We know that the Harenir are going to be a playable race in Midnight. And we can talk a little bit more about the Harenir here in a second, because yes, they seem to be the missing link between night trolls and night elves. They definitely seem to be right in between there. You have the Amani trolls, which are right there. They have an invested interest in the world not going away, so they may actually help. But I don't know that it's going to be entirely elf specific. If I had to hazard a guess, once we're done with initial Sunwell stuff, it's either going to have the Blood Elves going to Belamath for a while, depending on whether or not Silvermoon City survives, or them sending just a congregation to sort of interact with the other elves, which they haven't done yet, because I don't think they felt welcome. And we're going to move on from there, because if anything of the recent content has taught me anything, they're going to drop this and move on to something else. But that's my theory. Matt, do you have thoughts about whether or not this is going to be an elf-centric expansion?
I think there's going to be elves as a big part of it, because obviously destroying the Sunwell, possibly trying to create a Void Well, is something that's going on. We also know that the Army of the Light shows up I that's in the opening cinematic, guys. I don't feel like it's a spoiler when Blizzard literally announces it in a cinematic like a year before the expansion comes out. I'm sorry, but you're going into the game, you're supposed to know this. So yeah, Army of the Light shows up. That implies some things because the Army of the Light an anti-Legion organization,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't like the Void either. When Ilaria was getting her Void on while she was hanging out with them, they locked her up. They were like, "No, Void bad." So I don't think it's going to just be, elves, elves, elves. For one thing, I don't think you're going to see a lot of night elf stuff in here. I mean, the part where night elves get paladins, that's going to be amazing. Joe is like weeping happy joy tears right now. But, in all sincerity, I would love to see Belemeth get used. I would love to see night elf like civilians get evacuated to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like not night elf, blood elf civilians get evacuated to it. Like I'd love to see a thing where for once people are like, well, let's not leave our civilian population in the city to get destroyed. Let's get them out of here. We've
And
got mages. They've got mages.
They have a secure location that is protected by the
Yeah,
dragons on literally an island out in the middle of
effing nowhere.
effing nowhere
Yeah,
that's going to be real hard for anybody to get to. Let's get our citizens there. Like,
yeah.
yeah, I would agree with that.
Let's move them over, and I would like it if at one point you actually do get like, the Blood Elves are like standing against Void forces there under Xal'atath, and then you see like druidic portals opening up and night elves come riding out and arcane portals opening up, and the night, not the nightborn elves start showing up, and there's elves from the Dire Maul area, the original the ones that are the night elf wizards now. They show up, and you get like void elves make a big void portal and show up and like, f you. We don't do what the void says. The void does what we say, and just everybody is there. That'd be cool. I don't know that it's gonna happen. I think it'd be a great end of part one of the campaign type thing, but no idea. I don't think this expansion is going to just be an elf expansion though. I I have no idea what happens in part two of this because we know stuff is going to happen. We know that there's going to be like a chapter one of like the campaign that you go through as you level. I don't know what happens then after. I don't know what the next patch will be.
Yeah,
Like Joe said, we've seen a lot of patches just kind of happen.
yeah,
So maybe that'll happen. We do know that the Harroneers show up almost immediately.
yeah, and
We are going to them in the opening parts of this.
which is one of the things that I think is interesting because, and Matt talked about this a little bit earlier, and I've been literally screaming my head off about this since the first cinematic just dropped. Actually, since the new content released, the Mana Forge stuff, where I'm starting to question the structure on where we're going and things because the logical order that we seem to have since, and I think Matt's right. I think since Legion, minus the final twist, which we kind of come to expect at this, it kind of got thrown out the window, right? Like I would have expected the Mana Forge stuff to be the opening sequence of Koresh, all that stuff to be the opening sequence of Midnight, leading into the Sunwell and the Chase, which are two completely different things. And I would have expected any of the Harroneer and Black Blood stuff to be the last chapter of the War Within, prepping them to join our fight in the next expansion. But that seems to be yoinked out and maybe pushed back in here at the beginning of Midnight. But that also means that I don't know if we're going to go from elves to more elf stuff or if we're going to go from elves to Titan stuff now, right? Like how big of a jump are we going to get from one story element to another? Because the other side of this, and Matt pointed this out when I started screaming about this is part of a trilogy, right? And does that change the rules and how the story progresses? Because the War Within is the first part, Midnight is the second part, the Last Titan or Final Titan is the last part, but it's all meant to be one cohesive thing, one cohesive experience spread out across three different books, essentially. And does that change how the story elements are laid out? And does that change how things are really grouped? Is it a video game that we're used to anymore at that point? And I don't know. Right? Like, I don't know, because in past, if we started with elves, I would have assumed that there would be more elf stuff because we would have had to continue that story, or it would have moved us around in a particular direction. Like even the War Within, we start by going to Dornagal and we help the Earthen, but while we're helping the Earthen, we learn about the Black Blood. We learn about the Nerubians. We learn about them going crazy, and we start chasing the Black Blood. And then moving into the second chapter, we're still working on chasing the Black Blood, despite the fact that we just went through and did a whole bunch of, raid tactics against the Nerubians, not Nerubians. I can't remember their name of the actual specific offshoot, but we go through and we free them from this and the sort of shackles to the flesh that they had there. But then we move swiftly from that to tracing the Black Blood to the goblins, and then we drop it to go to Koresh. And I would have thought that through line would have continued and then led us into that. So I don't know anymore. And I find that oddly fun, but also nerve-wracking at the same time, because I don't know. But I don't think it's going to be an elf-centric thing. And I don't know that we're ever going to talk about how the Harenir are the missing link between night elves and night trolls. We might. There might be a night elf that sees them and goes, hey, you look like what our ancestors told us we looked like at one point. Or maybe it will be, why can't I think of their names? The Nightborn that looks at them and says, oh, yeah, we know, we saw this happening. Like we saw this happening in real time. We know what this is. Or the Amani trolls going, hey, you look like you got the clan markings of the old night trolls, or the one night troll that exists, because there is one night troll that still exists out there, recognizes
she's in Zandalar, and they treat her like an oddity,
like a pet.
Yeah.
So
but I mean, for that matter too, there's also one other thing I want to point out, because I think it might come up, it might not, but the Harenir, when we meet them, are protecting roots.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't ever say what those roots are.
I speculated that it was like getting your roots, right?
I think it's Eluna here.
Yep.
The first world tree.
First world tree.
The one that Amanthul wrecked. And I remember saying to you before, and I think you had brought up something along those lines.
The protective shell.
Before that. Just that if you go to Khazalgar and you look at the place, it looks like fossilized roots. It looks like some giant tree that got ripped in half.
Just look where the rookery is.
Yeah. It looks like the roots of a giant destroyed world tree.
Mm-hmm.
And it would make sense then that if you go into the world, you see more roots, and the Harenir are down there protecting those roots. And it would imply that the Harenir are everywhere in Azeroth where there are roots from that ancient world tree to protect.
Yeah, they may be the first tenders of the first world tree, for all we know.
Yeah, and we know that there are such near Silvermoon, because all the way back in Bow Shadow, when the 4 dragons of Nightmare were popping out of portals,
mm-hmm.
those are trees that Fandral Staghelm planted to try and create more world tree-like defenses. It's like Staghelm loved world trees. It would not surprise me if he knew where all the root systems were, and he deliberately tried to plant world trees on top of those. It would not surprise me if the world tree that's broken in Northrend, I know the name, but I can't remember it. Vordrasil? Yeah, Vordrasil. If Vordrasil was originally built somewhere where he knew the roots of the ancient world tree were. The Grizzly Hills don't look that dissimilar from that. You could look at the world, like the mountains and the Grizzly Hills kind of give you the feeling of a giant tree trunk. And keep in mind that before the Sundering, all these areas were much closer together.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these different areas were much, much closer. And what is now separated areas could have all been the root systems of this original massive tree, which we see when we go to Ungoro in the raid, and Il'gynoth talks to us.
The other side of that I just want to throw in there is we don't know, like, as much as the top layer of Earth has shifted, we don't know how the underground has shifted, or if it has much.
Well, it's got to have shifted enough for the land to be separated, but that's all.
Mm-hmm.
And for that matter, it might not have stopped growing down there.
Mm-hmm.
So the tree could have, its root systems could be still growing.
And
In fact, it seems very likely that they are, because the Haranir are protecting roots. They're not protecting dead roots.
And I remember speculating that the root system here may have been the remnants of, like you said, the first world tree, but that first world tree may have been literally armor that was set aside across or around the soul of Azeroth, because that feels like what we got as far as the story of the War Within, especially going through the Nerubian area and looking at what they have and that cavernous area that they've settled in, that again looks like it's been excavated, looks like something was ripped out of it, and having that area of the roots that are definitely at the edge of that area. It could have been roots that were pulled out. It could have been an old god. It could have been an old god trying to burrow through the root armor at that particular point. We don't know, but we definitely know that the Haranir know more about it than we do.
Let's look at another thing too. We keep getting told that the black blood is the blood of old gods.
We know that now.
There's only one old god I can think of who could have dumped that much blood down there.
Yasiraj.
Yes. And Yasiraj was yoinked out of the world by Aman'Thul himself, right?
Yep. We know that he was ripped out of the world. We don't know what the damage underneath the ground was caused by it, but we do know that.
I'm just wondering if maybe he was on a tree.
Yeah.
Because Il'gynoth is constantly trying to talk about, or torches to light our way. He manifests in the raid as a big
tree.
Freaking tree.
We fight him in a world tree.
What if Il'gynoth was the remnant of an old god's trying to corrupt the world tree, because that's the thing they were trying to overcome? And that comes back to me on the idea of why we keep binding elves and elf-like beings to the service of these world trees. Why did the dragons make the night elves immortal and bind them to the second world tree? Why do the Haranir have to go around protecting the root systems of this world tree? Why are there elven bases that touch the Emerald Dream all over the place throughout the world that link into these trees that Fandral Staghelm created? I just think there's a lot of interesting stuff you could do with this. I don't know how much of it we're going to see.
Yeah, and I mean, I would love to see more of it.
I think we're going to see it in the next expansion.
I would agree. I think if we're going to see it at any point in time, I don't think it's going to be Midnight. I think it's going to be in the last Titan. I think that's more likely to be the case. So I agree with you. But I think that's going to do it for us on time here, folks. I do want to thank you for joining us. Again, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast FAQ, and an ads-free site experience. If you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us on Discord, we have 2 channels set aside. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. Same rules apply. And then if you are a Patreon subscriber, you have access to the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. With that, folks, we'll catch you next week.